A billionaire once offered me $1 million to stand there and let her bodyguard hit me. Just once. Take the punch, stay on your feet, and the money is yours. She said it the way someone tosses a coin at a street performer. Bored, amused, surrounded by a crowd of people exactly like her, all of them laughing, because to them I was nobody. Just a man in a catering vest topping off wine glasses. And watching a poor man get knocked flat for their entertainment was the most fun they'd had all night. But I needed that money, I needed it badly. So I put down my tray and said, okay. I slipped off my jacket, and that's when the bodyguard, this mountain of a man who was supposed to throw the punch, got his first real look at me without the vest, and the color drained right out of his face. He stepped back. He turned to the billionaire, and in a voice shaking with something close to fear, he said, "Mum, please call this off. You don't know who you're looking at. Please don't make me do this." The laughter died instantly. I'm going to tell you everything. Who I used to be, why a trained bodyguard would rather walk off the job than lay a finger on me, and why I'd let myself be made a fool of for money in the first place. But first, one small thing. I'm not here to beg for your attention. Stay if you want to. I'll just say this much. This is a story about the strongest thing a man can ever do, and it has nothing to do with throwing a punch. If that sounds like your kind of story, settle in and tap subscribe if it's earned. Who I used to be. My name is Sonny Vega. I'm 41. These days I take whatever honest work comes my way. Catering gigs, warehouse shifts, cleaning jobs, hauling furniture, anything that keeps the lights on. But there was a stretch of years when plenty of people knew exactly who I was because I used to fight professionally. 30-something fights, and not one man ever beat me, not one ever put me on the canvas. They had a nickname for me back then, the man who was never knocked down. People hear that and picture a hard skull or a thick neck, but that's not what it was about at all. It's about something deeper, a refusal in a man's bones that simply won't bend, won't quit, won't let the other guy see him fold no matter what's raining down on him. You can condition a body to absorb punishment, but the thing that keeps you upright when every nerve is begging you to drop, that's not something you build. You're born with it or you aren't. I was born with it. My old coach used to say I had something in my spine other fighters just didn't have. Hurt me all you wanted, and I have been hurt. I would not go down. I'd dig my heels in and outlast the bell. That was the whole legend, if you can call it that. Not that I punched the hardest, though I could. It was that I simply could not be put on the floor. Keep that in mind, because a billionaire was about to bet $1 million that one hired punch could accomplish what 30 professional fighters at their peak never managed. She had no idea what she was up against. I'd been one win away from a title shot, and the kind of money that rewrites a family's future for generations. It was all set up. And then I walked away from every bit of it, at the absolute peak. The belt, the payday, the spotlight, gone by my own choice. Almost no one understood why I'd do that. Before I get to the party and the punch that never landed, you need to know why I quit, because it explains the man I became and everything I did and didn't do that night. Pearl, I'm raising my daughter alone. Pearl is 6. Her mother, my wife Anna, died 2 years ago, a sickness that moved fast and showed no mercy, and there wasn't a thing in the world my strength could do to stop it. That's a lesson every strong man eventually learns the hard way, so now it's just the two of us, Pearl and me, and she is the reason for absolutely everything. She's why I left fighting behind. She's why I took my jacket off at that party. And she's why this story ends the way it does. Everything I am flows from that little girl. I should say a word about Anna because she's part of this strength too. She never once pushed me to keep fighting. Not even when the purses would have made our life easier. Not even during the lean years right after I quit. The night I came home from the delivery room and told her I was done, that I was giving up the title shot and the money, plenty of wives would have argued. Nobody would have blamed her. Anna just looked at me, our newborn in her arms, and said, "Good." I never wanted to raise her wondering if her father was going to come home with his brain scrambled. That was Anna through and through. She'd take a husband who was poor and whole over one who was rich and broken. Then the illness took her anyway, fast and merciless, and every undefeated thing about my hands couldn't lay a finger on it. I learned the hardest way there is how much of this world's strength simply cannot reach. So when I say Pearl is all I have, I mean it exactly. She's what's left of Anna on this earth. There's nothing I wouldn't endure for that child, no humiliation I wouldn't swallow whole. A room full of wealthy people found that out the night they decided to have some fun with the help. The hospital hallway. Here's the real reason I quit. And I've never told it quite like this before. My last fight, the one meant to launch me straight into the title, was against a hungry young kid on the way up. In the 7th round, I landed a clean shot I'd thrown 10,000 times before. He dropped and he didn't get back upright. Stretcher, ambulance, hospital. For 3 days, nobody could say whether that young man would make it. For 3 days, I sat in a waiting room, not even allowed near him, bargaining with a god I'd mostly forgotten, making every promise a desperate man makes, while a kid with his whole life still ahead of him lay in a coma because of my hands. I can't fully put those 3 days into words even now, but I can tell you their shape. Knowing, in theory, that your profession is dangerous is one thing. Every fighter signs up for that risk, tells himself the other guy signed up too. But standing in a hospital corridor and watching that boy's mother walk past toward his room, knowing the reason she's there is you, your hands, trained for exactly this purpose, there's no waiver that covers that. For 3 days I kept staring at my own hands like they belonged to a stranger, like two animals I'd kept leashed that had finally slipped free and done what they'd always been built to do. I'd told myself for years I was an athlete, a craftsman. Standing in that hallway, the truth caught up with me. I was a man paid to hurt other men, and I'd gotten so skilled at it that I'd nearly killed someone's son. I made a lot of promises to God in that hallway. He woke up on the 3rd day, thank God, and I spent the rest of my life keeping every one of those promises. He recovered, never fought again, but he recovered. And here's the part that rewired me completely. While I sat in that waiting room, terrified I'd killed a man, my wife Anna was 9 months pregnant at home. On the 2nd night, she went into labor, and I walked out of that hospital and drove straight to another one. I left the worst moment of my life and arrived at the best one within hours. They placed my newborn daughter into those same 2 hands. The hands that had just put a young man in a coma now held this tiny, brand new person who trusted them without question. Sitting in that delivery room, holding Pearl, I made her a promise that the hands which had hurt someone so badly I thought I'd killed him would never again be used in anger, that they'd hold her instead, feed her, work for her, that the man who was never knocked down was finished knocking anyone down for good. I was going to be her father, not a weapon. 1 week later, I walked away from the championship, the money, all of it. People said I'd lost my mind. My manager cried. He was watching a fortune evaporate. The world called me a fool for tossing away a title shot. But I'd held my little girl in the same hands that had nearly ended a man's life. And I knew, beyond any doubt, that there was only one right choice. Pearl, or the fight. It was never going to be the fight. People who've never faced a choice like that can't really picture it, so let me try. Everyone told me I was throwing away a fortune, and I was the real kind, the kind that buys houses and sets up grandchildren who haven't been born yet. The strange part is, I knew exactly what it would cost us in dollars, and I did it anyway, because some things money can't measure against. Looking at those two hands holding my daughter, I understood all the way down that I couldn't be both men. I couldn't step into a ring trying to render another human being unconscious for a paycheck and also be the father I wanted my girl to admire. One of those men had to disappear so the other could exist. Standing there, for everything it cost, it wasn't even a hard call. The fighter died in that delivery room so the father could live. I have never once regretted which of them I let go. Not even on the night $1 million hung in the balance. Camilla Rourke's party. So that's who I was the night of the party. A man who used to be somebody who'd walked away from all of it to keep a promise made to a newborn, a widower, a single dad, a guy in a rented vest serving canapes to wealthy strangers so his daughter could have new winter boots. Let me tell you about Camilla Rourke, the host, a billionaire. Tech money, real estate money, the kind the papers tracked. Her house was the sort of place that requires a whole crew of temporary staff for one evening, and that night I was one of them. I'd taken the job because the pay was solid, and Pearl needed boots, and there was a school trip I wanted her to be able to go on. Just another invisible man moving through a sea of the very rich refilling glasses. Camilla Rourke, I came to learn over the course of the evening, was a particular breed of wealthy, so bored, so cushioned from consequence, so accustomed to the world rearranging itself around her that cruelty had become a hobby. A few drinks in, holding court with friends, just as comfortable as she was, her eyes landed on me. The server. And she decided, the way that kind of person decides things, that I'd make decent entertainment. It started small. A remark about my vest, a joke at my expense, pitched loud enough for me to catch, watching to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. I'd been looked down on long before fighting and long after. You learn to let it slide off. But I want to be honest about something, because it's part of the point I'm making. Her words did reach me. I'm human, standing in a room of people who've decided your furniture that happens to pour wine, that lands every single time, no matter how many times you've absorbed it. The old version of me had a temper, and that temper hadn't vanished. I'd just learned to keep it on a short chain. So, as she kept needling me, something old and buried stirred, wanting to remind that whole room exactly who they were laughing at. Here's what nobody tells you about real self-control. It's not the absence of the pull. It's feeling that pull completely, the whole weight of it, and setting it down anyway. I felt every insult she threw, and I set down every one of them, not because I'm some kind of saint, but because I had a 6-year-old waiting for me at home, and I wasn't going to let one bored woman's bad evening drag me back into a man I'd buried for that little girl's sake. That restraint was the hardest work I did all year. My silence seemed to provoke her further, so she escalated, landing on the idea that would entertain her circle most. She waved me over and announced, loud enough for everyone, "You look like you could use some money, sweetheart. Here's a game for you." She pointed to the enormous man behind her, her bodyguard, built like a bank vault. "Dom's going to hit you once as hard as he wants. Stay on your feet and I'll write you a check for $1 million right now. One punch, $1 million. What do you say, or are you too scared?" The circle laughed, gasped, cheered her on. To them this was comedy. The bored billionaire dangling a fortune in front of the help, certain he'd be too frightened to try, or that he'd be flattened for their amusement. Either way, a good story for weeks. I stood there, felt the old thing wake up, and pushed it back down. Then I did math nobody in that room could see me doing. $1 million. Do you know what that means to a man like me? It's Pearl's whole future. A house instead of a cramped apartment. College paid in full. Never again lying awake doing the grim arithmetic of which Bill waits another month. Everything I couldn't give my daughter on a server's wage, handed to me for the cost of my pride, and one punch from a man I already knew with total certainty could not actually hurt me. You have to understand the math of raising a child alone to understand why I didn't hesitate. When you're a single father stretching every dollar, your life becomes a string of small, grinding refusals. We can't afford it. Not this month, maybe next year. You get good at disappointing the person you love most, in tiny doses, smiling the whole time so she never feels the weight of it. That very week, Pearl had asked about a school trip, and I'd given her the cheerful "we'll see" that both of us understood meant no. And here was a woman for whom $1 million was pocket change, offering me that exact sum to absorb one insult I already knew wouldn't even sting. Turning it down to protect my pride would have been the most expensive vanity of my life, paid for entirely out of my daughter's future. No bruised ego is worth more than a child's whole life. I set my tray down before she even finished talking, because here's what Camilla Rourke didn't know, what none of them knew. I was the man who was never knocked down. Not by trained professionals at the top of their sport. This bodyguard, however large, was muscle, not a fighter. I could read it in his posture. He could put everything he had into one swing and I still wouldn't fall. I knew that the way I know my own name. They thought they were offering me a humiliation. They were actually handing me my daughter's future for something I could have done half asleep. Recognition, so I set down the tray and said quietly, "Okay, I'll take that bet." The circle howled. I pulled off my jacket, folded it, set it on a chair, rolled up my sleeves, and squared up to take the hit. That's when everything shifted. Because Dom, the bodyguard, who a second earlier had been sizing me up with the lazy confidence of an easy assignment, got his first real look at what was actually under that vest. The build of a man who'd trained for 15 years. The way I held myself, the stillness a real fighter recognizes instantly in another. I watched the contempt drain off his face and something else move in behind it. Recognition, and right on its heels, fear. There's a language that passes between two men who've lived in that world, faster than words. In the hands, the stance, the quiet. A real fighter carries himself a certain way even in a grocery line, even 15 years removed from the ring, even in a catering vest. The body never forgets its old vocabulary. Dom spoke that language fluently. Then I watched him run the same calculation I'd run a minute earlier, just from the other side. His boss had just ordered him to throw a punch at a man who couldn't be knocked down, and who, if he ever chose to respond, could take Dom apart without much effort. Dom wanted absolutely no part of that. Not cowardice. Recognition. You don't raise a hand to a man like that if you understand what you're looking at. And Dom understood completely. It turned out Dom had grown up around the sport. He told me weeks later, over coffee, that he'd had a poster of me on his bedroom wall as a kid. That he'd watched my fights on repeat. Not for flash, because I never had any, but for the simple refusal to go down. He said a scared kid from a rough neighborhood needed to believe that kind of staying power was possible, and watching me taught him it was, without us ever having met. Now here he was, 15 years on, ordered to let me absorb a punch for a rich woman's entertainment. He told me later it nearly broke his heart, and that refusing was the only way he had to repay a debt he'd been carrying since he was 12. I knew none of that standing there. I just watched a big man's composure collapse, but that was the reason underneath it. Dom stepped back. This huge, professional man retreated from me, turned to Camilla Rourke, and the whole party watched his face go white, his hands lift almost in a plea. Mom, please, call this off. She laughed, irritated. Dom, don't be ridiculous, just... Mom, his voice cracked. You don't know who this is. I can't hit this man, I won't. Do you hear me? I will not put my hands on him. The room had gone quiet, confused, the laughter curdling, because a 6.5-foot bodyguard looked like he'd just seen a ghost. Camilla, annoyed, demanded, "Who is he?" "He's a waiter." Dom looked at her, then at me, with something close to reverence, and said my real name, my old fighting name, the one nobody at that party had any business knowing. A couple of the older men in the circle, the ones who'd followed the sport years back, made sounds of recognition, and you could feel it spread outward as the room realized. The whole mood flipped inside out in about 5 seconds. Then Dom said, the thing I'll never forget. Quieter now, almost gentle. "Ma'am, this man was the best fighter I ever watched, never knocked down, not once, in his entire career. You just offered him $1 million to take a punch and stay on his feet." A short, disbelieving laugh. "He could take a hit from anybody alive and still be standing, but that's not even the real thing. The real thing is, if a man like this ever decided to hit back, there isn't enough security in this house to help you. You're in no danger because I can already tell exactly what kind of man he is just from how he's standing there, absorbing your insults. But God, Mum, do you understand what you've been doing all night? Do you know who you've been treating like a toy?" The room went dead silent. Camilla finally looked at me, really looked. Not as the help, not as a punchline, but as a man. I watched the cruelty drain out of her face and something like shame move in behind it, because she finally understood. She'd spent the whole evening tormenting a man for sport, fully confident in her power over him, and it turned out he could have taken apart her entire security detail with his bare hands and had simply, quietly, chosen not to, because he wanted to buy his daughter some winter boots. The choice. Here's the part I most want you to hear. Everyone in that frozen, silent room was waiting to see what I'd do next. The powerful had just discovered I wasn't powerless at all, that I was, in fact, the most dangerous person in the building. There's a version of this story where I use that, where I let Camilla Rourke feel afraid, where I let the bodyguard's fear hang in the air a little longer and savor it, where I take some quiet revenge for the whole humiliating evening, even just with a look. Everyone expected exactly that. Honestly, the whole room felt I'd earned it, but I'd made a promise once in a delivery room, holding a newborn in the same hands that had nearly killed a man. Those hands don't do that anymore, not even when it's deserved. This is the heart of the whole thing. It would have felt incredible for about 10 seconds to draw myself up and let that cruel room feel the cold drop in the stomach Camilla Rourke had absolutely earned. To take back, with one hard look, everything she'd stolen from me that night. Nobody would have blamed me. Half that room would have cheered quietly. And here's what I've learned that most people never figure out. That pull toward satisfying, justified cruelty is exactly the thing you have to be strong enough to set aside. Anyone can strike back when they've been wronged. Anyone can take the revenge sitting right there, free for the taking. That's not strength, that's gravity. That's just falling. The strength is in not falling. It's standing in the one moment of your entire life where revenge would be applauded and choosing anyway to keep your hands open. Because somewhere across the city, a little girl is asleep, about to grow up into whatever kind of person her father showed her he was. I wasn't going to let Camilla Rourke turn me into someone cruel. That was the one thing in that entire mansion her money couldn't buy, so I didn't draw myself up. I didn't say one hard word to a woman who absolutely had it coming. Instead, I walked over to Dom and shook his hand. "Thank you," I told him quietly. That took more nerve than throwing the punch would have. Standing up to your boss like that, that's the real strength. You're a good man, Dom. I watched this enormous professional get tears in his eyes because the fighter he'd idolized as a kid had just called him good. Then I picked my jacket back up off the chair and put it on, the best fighter that Bodyguard had ever seen, slipping his server's vest back over his shoulders in a silent ballroom full of billionaires. I turned to Camilla Rourke and said gently, without an ounce of edge to it, "I should probably get back to work, Mum. People need their glasses topped off." I think that's the moment that truly undid her. Not fear. The opposite of fear. Watching a man who could have frightened her choose gentleness instead. Choose humility with the entire room watching and go back to being the help because that honest work was what fed his daughter. If I'd threatened her, she'd have had something to push against, something to justify. Instead, I gave her nothing but the plain truth of who I was, a far stronger, far kinder man than she'd taken me for, and let her sit with it. The check, now the $1 million. Technically, I'd won the bet. The terms were simple. Take one punch, stay standing. No punch was ever thrown, but only because her own man refused to throw it, having recognized the whole bet was rigged from the start, just not in the direction she thought. She'd offered me a fortune to survive something she assumed was nearly impossible, and it would have cost me nothing at all. I could have pushed the technicality. I didn't need to, because Camilla Rourke walked over in front of everyone, hands trembling slightly, and said, "I owe you a real apology. I've treated you terribly all night, and you've shown me more grace in the last 5 minutes than I think I've shown anyone in years. Then, I'm writing the check. Not because of the bet, because I'd like to do one decent thing tonight, and because something tells me you'll do far better with this money than I ever have. I took every cent, and I felt no guilt about it whatsoever, for the same reason I'd taken off my jacket in the first place. That money was never about me. If it had been about my pride, I'd have told her exactly where to put her offer hours earlier and walked out. It was about Pearl, only ever about Pearl. I swallowed an entire humiliating evening for my daughter's future, and refusing the check at the end just to protect my own ego would have made the whole thing meaningless. A proud man turns the money down, a father takes it. I've never been confused about which one I am. Before I left, I told her one more thing. "Ms. Rourke, can I tell you why I really took my jacket off tonight? Not for me. I've got a 6-year-old at home named Pearl. Her mother passed 2 years ago, and it's just the two of us now. $1 million is the difference between the life I can give her and the life I want to give her. That's the whole reason. I'd have let 100 men hit me for that little girl. So, thank you. You changed her entire life tonight, even if that wasn't your plan. After Pearl is set for life, that's what matters most. She'll go to whatever college she wants. We live in a real house now with a yard. I sleep at night. I still work. I always will. I don't know any other way to be. But now I work because I want to, not because the wolf's at the door. The money never changed the one thing that matters. I'm still, first and always, just Pearl's father. The man who walked away from a championship to hold her and would do it again without thinking twice. Dom and I are friends now. He quit working for Camilla Rourke not long after, said he couldn't keep working for someone who'd treat a person that way, apology or not. I helped him get into training young fighters. Work he was always meant to do. He's good at it. He teaches them the same lesson I'd teach. The most important thing a fighter ever learns is when not to fight. He tells his students about that night, I'm told. About the greatest fighter he ever saw, taking off his jacket to absorb a punch for his daughter, then putting it back on without ever throwing one. He calls it the best lesson he ever got. I think he undersells himself. Standing up to his own boss took its own kind of courage. But I'm honored to be part of his story. As for Camilla Rourke, something I didn't expect. She changed. Not overnight, not into a different person entirely, but she changed. She wrote me a letter months later saying that night was the first time in years anyone had held up a mirror she didn't like looking into, and that she'd been trying ever since to be a different kind of person with her money and influence. I don't know how far she's gotten. People are hard to change. But I believe she meant it. And I believe one man choosing gentleness over revenge cracked something open in her that needed cracking. You never know what a little mercy will do to someone. Sometimes it does more than a fist ever could. What I want you to take from this, I think about that night often and what it confirmed for me, something I already knew but needed reminding of. Everyone in that room believed they understood power, that it was Camilla Rourke's money, her bodyguard, her ability to make the staff dance for her amusement. The most powerful person in that entire mansion turned out to be the quiet man in the catering vest. And his power wasn't in his fists, which could have ended any of them. It was in his restraint, his choice, with every excuse in the world to do otherwise, to be gentle, to be humble, to pick his jacket back up. That night, once I finally got home and paid the sitter, I stood in the doorway of Pearl's room and watched her sleep for a while. I had that $1 million check folded in my pocket and thought about the whole future it had just unlocked for her. But mostly I just looked at her. This small person I'd given up a championship for and would give up the world for. I thought about the promise I'd made to those same hands the day she was born. So I went in quietly and tucked her blanket up under her chin, gentle as anything, with hands that were never going to hurt anyone again. She stirred, half asleep, and murmured, "Daddy?" "I'm here, baby," I said. "Go back to sleep. Everything's good." And it was. For the first time in a long while, everything really was good. So before I go, let me ask you something. We've all absorbed this idea that strength is about how much you can do to other people, how hard you can hit, how much punishment you can take, how much you can bend the world to your will. But I've come to believe the truest strength is the strength to not to hold the power to hurt someone and choose, instead, not to use it, to have every reason for revenge handed to you and choose mercy anyway, to know you could win the fight and decide your daughter's eyes on you are worth more than winning it. So tell me in the comments, when have you seen someone show that kind of strength? The strength to hold back when nobody would have blamed them for letting go? Or when did you manage it yourself? Those are the stories I want to hear. Those are the real champions.